Our next speaker is another good friend of PdF. Eli Pariser was sitting in his apartment in Brooklyn after 9/11, posted a petition online, which just took off. And the next morning, I think if the story goes, CNN was calling, asking to speak to the president of this organization, and they had no idea that he was still in his pajamas, and there was no organization. Eli has gone a long way from there. He merged that list into MoveOn's existing list, took over as MoveOn's executive director for a number of years, and after a well-earned break, came back and is now president of MoveOn.org. He's going to talk to us about the problem of silos and echo chambers and personalization, and whether we can do some things actively to combat that. Eli?
Hi, everybody. I'm Eli Pariser, and I've always believed that the internet, do we have the PowerPoint here? I've always believed in the internet. I've always believed that the internet would make things more open, more democratic, more flat. But I'm thinking about something recently that I think has the potential to push things in the other direction. Let me illustrate what I think is going on. Imagine that when you came into this room, I'd asked men to sit on one side, women to sit on the other. I'd asked you to divide up by where your hometown was. I'd asked you to divide up by age. And if I kept going, basically, pretty soon you'd be in a group of one. Now, imagine I proceeded with this presentation, but rather than giving the same talk to everybody, I custom tailored it to you. Maybe if you're like a young guy, I would add more, video of explosions or something. So you'd probably like your personalized version better, and that makes sense. It's made for you. It's custom tailored for you. But it would be a bad idea for me to do things this way, because personalized presentations would kind of render moot the point of a conference. You wouldn't be able to have the snarky conversations in the hallways if you didn't know what I had said to everyone. It would be impossible for us to share ideas with each other. So I'm not going to be giving a personalized presentation today, but actually, since late 2009, Google has been doing something very much like this. Every time you search for something, Google personalizes your search results. An engineer there told me that there are 57 signals that Google looks at about who you are: your browser, your location, your web history. Even if you're not logged in, personalization is at work. There is no standard Google anymore. To see what this looks like, check out this screenshot that we took 2 days ago. I had two friends search for the term BP. And they're pretty similar people. They're women in the Northeast. They have pretty similar politics. But they got really different results. So one of them has results that are much more news-focused. You can see on the right. And one of them has results that are much more business-focused. One of this, most people click on the first 3 links in Google. And one of those 3 links for one of these people has to do with the oil spill. For the other person, it actually doesn't. And this is my favorite part. If you look up at the top, and it's hard to read, one of them got about 140 million search results, and the other got about 181 million. So it's a 41 million difference in the number of results that they got. Now, if the results are that different for 2 women who are pretty similar, in a similar place, imagine how different they would be between my friends and, say, a Republican man in Texas. And Facebook is doing this too. I first noticed this phenomenon when I noticed that something strange was going on my Facebook page. I, lean to the left, but I've tried to befriend conservatives. I want to know what they're thinking about. I want to learn some things. And so I've deliberately started to, add conservative Facebook friends. And I noticed that those links just weren't turning up. So it wasn't that my conservative friends weren't posting. But Facebook has a personalization algorithm. It looks at what I like, what I click on, and it tries to give me more of the stuff that I seem to engage with. So even though I've gone out of my way to reach out to people who think differently than me, Facebook was doing the math and noticing that mostly I was still engaging more with the progressive links, and actually that I was engaging more with the Lady Gaga links than the progressive links. So that's what was coming up in my newsfeed. No conservative links for me, even though I'd gone out of my way. So if Facebook were just a place to catch up with friends and spy on old college roommates, hi Shane, this wouldn't be such a big deal. But as we all know, for a quickly rising percentage of Americans, it's becoming the primary place where they get news. So just to recap, people are getting more and more of their information through personalized sources: Facebook, Google, Amazon, Netflix. And all of this personalization creates a unique information ecosystem for every person. Let's call it a filter bubble. The idea of these filters is to connect us with the stuff that we like and we find relevant to our interests. The more efficient they get, though, the less likely we are to be exposed to points of view we disagree with or find unpleasant, and the less likely we are to find new topics. So filtering isn't something that's new. Our brains are pretty good at it, and they can notice that we shouldn't be paying attention to the leaves, and we should be paying attention to that big thing with the stripy tail behind the tree. And the media has always filtered things as well. But personalization cranks up the degree of filtering in a way that I think can fundamentally change how information moves. There are really three ways that these filter bubbles are different than the filters that we've had in the past. The first is that the degree of personalization is much higher. So when someone reads The Nation, they share a frame of reference with other people who are reading that nation. But in your filter bubble, you're kind of alone. And this means that you might see a world that looks very different even from the person who's sitting right next to you. The second is that it's invisible. Google, going back to our thought experiment from a few minutes ago, if I asked everybody to divide up in that way, you would know that I had asked that, and you could ask me to cut it out, or you could just refuse to comply. But what Google is doing is invisible to you. You don't know on what basis Google is showing you what information. You don't know what you're not seeing. And so to use Donald Rumsfeld's phrase, it creates these big unknown unknowns. And the third thing that's new and different about the filter bubble is you don't choose it. Instead, it kind of chooses you. It follows you around. When you turn on Fox News, you know that you're choosing a curated information source that has a certain viewpoint. But the filter bubble comes to you, and it's actually kind of increasingly impossible to avoid. Because you're not choosing the filter, it's easier to imagine that the information that comes through is representative of all of the information out there, or unbiased. So here's another way to look at how personalization is changing things. You're all familiar with this. In the traditional media, editors sort through what's going on and decide what we need to know. And there's a lot of filtering that happened between the BP oil rig explosion and when we read about it on the newspaper or on an online news site. And so when the internet came along, I think a lot of us felt like the big promise was disintermediation, that we could get rid of the gatekeepers in the system and actually go direct. And that has happened to a certain degree. I move on. We get to send emails directly to 5 million people. We don't have to go through the postal system. We don't have to go through journalists. We can just speak directly. With help from the new organization Access Now, demonstrators in Iran could reach the world directly through Twitter with their side of the story. So we felt like finally people with power, without power or money or influence, could get their message out, could circumvent the traditional gatekeepers. But this is where these personalization filters, these filter bubbles come in, because after this period of disintermediation, I think what we're seeing is kind of a re-intermediation. There's a new process for deciding what you get to see and what you don't. It's just that this time, it's run by machines, not people. And as these algorithms get more sophisticated and more pervasive, it will become harder to go direct. Just to be clear, I don't fault Google with this. This is a great business strategy, and it serves their customers. And of course, I'm not saying we can go without filters. We're dealing with an unprecedented amount of information. This is one of my favorite stats that I've come across recently. More data was created in 2009 than in the entire history of humankind through 2008 by one study. So clearly, some kind of filters are necessary. But as the face of curation changes from a person to a machine, we have to figure out what that means for the type of information we get and don't get. And perhaps most importantly, we need to ask, what are the values embedded in these filters? We've had lots of conversations as a society about the values and politics behind the New York Times front page. What does it mean that they're putting this on the front page and not that? And I think it's time for us to have those conversations about Google and Facebook. One of the values behind the new intermediaries clearly seems to be just give people what they want. And that way of thinking is great for consumers. It means we get more of what we want to read and watch and see, and we get to just hide the other stuff. And it keeps people coming back to Google and Facebook. That's why it's a great business strategy. But it's bad for citizens, because it doesn't tell us what we need to hear. It doesn't expose us to points of view that might challenge our thinking or current events that might disturb or upset us. I mean, I'll admit it. I don't like reading stories about depressing issues like homelessness in Afghanistan. It's not fun. I'd much rather click on something else. But I know it's important to know about these things because really they're matters of life and death. They're some of the most important things that are going on. And this is really one of the scariest things, I think, about this new world that we're moving into. Rather than us having to adjust to the world seems to adjust to better suit our liking. Social media researcher Dana Boyd, who a lot of you know, puts it this way: if we're not careful, we're going to develop the psychological equivalent of obesity. We'll find ourselves consuming content that is least beneficial for ourselves or the society as a whole. The filter bubble tells us what we want to hear, not what we need to, and it isolates us from each other. And as Cass Sunstein has pointed out, these filters are increasingly making it complicated to have a public conversation, or even, for that matter, a public. So what do we do about this? The greatest thing about the internet is that humans created it, and we can change it. It's plastic. Part of the responsibility for solving this problem lies with Google and Facebook. They need to make transparent what they know about us and how they're using that information to determine what we see, what our search results are, what our news feeds look like. And they also need to give us users more control. We should be able to slide a slider across the top of the Facebook and see things that are more similar or more different to our own personal views. We should be able to choose more diversity, more heterogeneity. But part of the responsibility also lies with us. As more and more of our society runs on code, we really need to get rid of that silly idea that code doesn't care about anything, that it's just a machine, that it doesn't have values. We need to remember that machines, that code, that software is designed by people who have ideas about the world, and that they incorporate those ideas into the code. They incorporate ideas about what matters into these software products that we're using. And most importantly, we need to start thinking creatively about how to bring heterogeneity into our increasingly filtered lives. This is a solvable problem, and it's a problem that's solvable, as Clay said, with some clever software design. And I'm here today in part because I think this is actually a great place to start. In this room are a lot of the people who have thought most deeply about democracy and politics. So I encourage you to join me in this conversation. And if you have ideas, tweet them at FilterBubble or at the PdF 2010 hashtag. If you disagree, tweet them there too. We'll continue the conversation there. But to conclude, you've probably seen this. This is an actual military PowerPoint slide on Afghanistan. And a lot of people laughed. I laughed about how complicated it is. It's really kind of amazing. But the fact is that Afghanistan is complicated. And it's not the only complex problem that we're facing. Terrorism, poverty, disease, these are big multivariable challenges. Solving them will inherently require the integration of different viewpoints, of different disciplines. We can only solve these problems together, and millions of lives depend on our getting that right. I still believe that the internet is our best hope for being able to connect together and figure out what to do to determine our collective destiny. But it just isn't going to happen if we're all surfing on an internet of one. Thank you.